Hello YouTube family. Today's topic will be how to form a line of dogs based on a female, not based on a male. Now, a lot of my videos on line breeding seem to be the most watched videos on this channel. I've covered multiple techniques using cousin approach, half uncle to niece approach, or half aunt to nephew approach. I've covered half sibling approach, which is inbreeding. But some of my viewers asked for this specific video of how to create a line of dogs specifically based on a female, not a male. So the question is, why would you create a line based on a female versus a male? And what is the difference in the approach in basing a line on a female versus a male? I mean, line breeding is a milder version of inbreeding, no matter how you slice it. So, what is the advantage of one versus the other? The reality is that a male can father a lot of puppies across a lot of females and has a longer shelf life than a female. If you breed a female at age 2, which is the earliest age at which you can get OFA hip x-rays, and you stop breeding by age 6, which is approaching middle age for a dog. Remember, they only live until 12, maybe 13. So 6 is middle age for a dog. A 6-year-old dog would be like a 35 to 40-year-old woman. So in human beings, youth favors fertility. In Mother Nature also. In Mother Nature, a 20-year-old woman is much more fertile than a 35-year-old woman or a 38-year-old woman. So in human beings this applies as well. So when you're breeding animals, you must always follow the laws of nature, because nature at the end dictates a lot of your outcomes. So age 6, I feel, is a relatively healthy age as a cutoff age for breeding, in my opinion. Now, other people may disagree. Again, I don't claim to know everything. I'm just giving you my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. I also don't claim to be the only person to define these strategies. These strategies have been around for 100 years, and there are books on them. One book on line breeding I recommend is by J. Lush. I'm going to write that down. J. Lush. He has a book from animal husbandry. It may be applicable to cows or it may be applicable to dogs. The same mammalian genetics applies in both cases. Another book you can find is Better Breeding by Carmel Battaglia. I'm going to write that down. And these were professors, they have a PhD. And there are others. Look in the description, I'll give you sources you can reference. Don't take my word for it. Read some other articles and news archives, and there's plenty of information in books to be found besides what you find on YouTube. So these are two names that come to mind when you're reading books on dog breeding. His method is essentially the rule of 5, the bracket formula method. He simply explains it. So this is essentially a bracket formula book. This is a book of how to get rid of diseases by moving statistical odds of breeding out a disease through statistical techniques to eliminate the chance of a disease coming up. This was written in the 1920s, if memory serves, before we had genetic testing. So he really did a tremendous study on cow herds, how to eliminate, by cycling a bull through multiple herds of cattle, how to eliminate a disease, because that same bull became the reference animal across a lot of animals, called the founding sire effect, and therefore his genetics propagated into multiple grandkids. Even if you rotated another bull into the herd, the genetic diseases of the first bull would still propagate. So he created a study of how to rotate bulls in cow herds using a rotation technique to prevent inbreeding depression. It's a very interesting book if you're into animal husbandry. But these are two prominent authors I recommend you read. So before we start on creating a line of dogs for my female dog, first you must understand certain terms and certain risks. The first thing I'm going to tell you is that if you're a novice with no understanding of genetics, do not, I repeat, do not inbreed or line breed. If your goal is to simply make money selling puppies, none of what I say applies to you. In fact, I don't recommend you watch this video. This is not for you. If your goal is to produce not specific quality, just cute puppies for market for $500 per puppy, this is not a video for you. The goal of a breeding program, it's called selective breeding. Selective means you're selective in what you're selecting and therefore what you're deselecting. If you're going to mate any male and female just to make puppies, either they're nervous wrecks, they're fear biters, they shake and shiver for no reason, without any abuse, but they shake and shiver on their own. You don't want to line breed dogs like that. You want to start off with the very healthy examples, and you must have a goal. What is your goal? Well, there are two goals in breeding a line of dogs. The first goal is preservation breeding. And the second goal is performance breeding. Performance breeding. Sorry for my handwriting, guys. I'm doing the best I can with my handwriting. So what is preservation breeding versus performance breeding? They are not the same. Let me give you an example. Most of our current breeds are heritage breeds. Take for example the German Shepherd. It's been invented in 1899. Now it's 2026. So that breed is 150 years old, 120 years old. Take the Doberman Pinscher, invented around the same time. It's a very old breed. So most breeding is of our heritage breeds, meaning you're continuing the breed as it is, hopefully, without seeking to modify it, but to preserve its best traits. That would be preservation breeding. Now, what is wrong with preservation breeding as interpreted by today's breeders? Take for example the Doberman Pinscher as an example. Louis Doberman, the father of the Doberman Pinscher, took the Rottweiler for the size and muscle and a certain degree of built-in aggressiveness. He crossed it with a miniature Pinscher. Now, Pinscher in German means terrier. So a Pinscher in German means terrier. So the German Pinscher is a terrier. And he used the French Bisseron. If you look at the French Bisseron, it resembles today's Doberman Pinscher. He took the Greyhound because he needed a dog that could keep up with a horse. So he needed a fast. He took the Hungarian Vizsla, another fast dog. Ignore the phone ringing in the background. He took various dog breeds, but the key idea was the dog that could keep up with a horse, had the prey drive of the terrier, the aggression and size and ferocity of the Rottweiler, and the intelligence of the early German sheepdogs. Not the German Shepherd, the German Shepherds that existed before the German Shepherd. In other words, the foundation dogs, the Thuringian dog from Thuringia in Prussia. So he wanted the Thuringian Shepherd, a predecessor of the German Shepherd. In fact, Horrid von Grafwith was a Thuringian line as one of the three types of shepherds formed the German Shepherd. So he used the Thuringian Shepherd, predecessor to the modern German Shepherd. Not the modern German Shepherd, it didn't exist yet. So he took the Thuringian Shepherd and the Besseron for the trainability, the Rottweiler for the size, mass, and intimidation, the miniature pinscher for the tenacity of a terrier and the prey drive, the Greyhound and the Hungarian Vizsla for running ability, and he combined all those breeds. Now, did he create a dog which was soft? No. He created a dog which was meant to be a guard dog from the beginning, to guard him as people attacked him while he was on horseback, and they would beat him up and then take their tax money back. He was a tax collector. So the original Doberman, as he devised it, was not a soft breed, it was a ferocious breed. But it was appropriate ferocity in defense of its handler. Not a dog which was crazy aggressive, but aggressive in defense of his handler. A trainable, fast in terms of running speed, but intimidating and aggressive dog. Not a lamb that looks nice but was soft. In other words, today's breeders have captured the look of the Doberman. It's a refined looking dog, but the dog is no longer the original Doberman pinscher as devised by Dr. Doberman, Louis Doberman. It looks like it, but it's a softened down, watered down version. So the same thing with the German Shepherd. You have the American show line, the West German show line. You have a watering down of what the breed was. Can these dogs herd sheep? Probably not. Can these dogs pass a Schutzen trial? Not the full version as it existed, with stick hits and how it was. Maybe a watered down version, but not the way it was. So today's West German working line probably represents the closest to the original German Shepherd as it was. So when I mean preservation breeding, I mean not only preserving the breed phenotypically, it looks like a German Shepherd, but anatomically, in other words, but also preserving the character of the breed as it was existing. Remember, not all breeds were companion breeds. Some breeds were definitely meant to show aggression to an enemy. It was not the core reason for creating the German Shepherd. It was a herding dog originally, but it was a core reason for creating the Doberman. So when I say preservation breeding, I do not mean a lamb in sheep's clothing. In other words, in wolf's clothing. In other words, preservation breeding attempts to preserve the breed as it was historically, not some watered down version. So I want to make sure I'm clear what I mean by preservation breeding. Okay, what do I mean by performance breeding? Well, take for example today's Dutch Shepherd. Is that the original breed? I would argue no. I would argue it's a reconstructed breed. After World War II, in the late 1940s, after the war, the breed was almost gone. It was almost, the population size of the breed was so small, the Dutch Shepherd nearly disappeared. So what did they do in Holland? Well, they bred to the Belgian Malinois. In the same litter, the brindle-colored pups were called Dutch Shepherd, and the fawn-colored pups were called Malinois. It was from the same two parents. When they wanted to increase the size of the dog, they bred to the German Shepherd, and then bred that outcome back to a Dutch Shepherd. So it's a breed that was reconstructed. Whatever remained of the original breed, with Malinois blood and some German Shepherd blood, bred over and over and over until the population size increased that it could sustain itself. Now, is it a pure breed now? Yes. But is it the original breed as it existed prior to the 1940s? Not completely. It's a reconstructed breed. Now, so what do we have in Holland? We have what's called the ex-Malinois. The X Malinois is not a pure Malinois. It is either a Dutch Shepherd Malinois cross, a German Shepherd Malinois cross, occasionally a Pit Bull Malinois cross, and occasionally a Great Dane Malinois cross. Then that's crossed again back to the Malinois to decrease the blood of the non-Malinois blood, but increase the percentage of the blood of the Malinois / Dutch Shepherd type. So it's called the X Malinois, not the Malinois. By X Malinois, it is not a purebred Malinois. It is something crossed with it. Now, how do they breed? Well, they have a sport called the, I'm going to erase this 1 second. So what that means is they don't have a closed stud book. Closed stud books means you only breed pure to pure. Nothing else is introduced. So how do they breed? They have a sport called the KNPV, called the Royal Dutch Police Dog Sport. I don't know what this word means in Dutch, but in English it's roughly translated as the Royal Dutch Police Dog Sport. And any dog that bites like hell on a bite suit and exhibits that ability to bite and rebite and regrip is bred. A dog which is too meek, too slow, not aggressive enough, not strong enough in its character, timid, it doesn't get bred. So you're breeding by performance. Can it do this sport? Yes, it gets bred. Can it not do this sport? No, it doesn't get bred. So you're selecting by performance. You're not selecting by purity of blood, you're selecting by performance. All right. But it's mostly a Malinois or a Dutch Shepherd. So even though there are other blood mixed with it, the pedigree is pure because the pedigree is known. So it's not a fully closed stud book. Other dog breeds can occasionally be crossed in. As long as the performance adds value to the dog, it's considered acceptable to be registered, even though it's not from pure blood. All right? So performance-based breeding breeds best to best as measured by a yardstick which is outside the control of the breeder. In other words, the KNPV sport judge has nothing to do with the breeder. He's just a judge. So there has to be a yardstick, a performance yardstick, by which to judge what to breed and not to breed. So, Katja de video. So now, is the German Shepherd able to be bred the same way as the Malinois or X-Malinois? Yes and no. First of all, it's a closed stud book. It's a pure breed. It's not mixed with anything else. But if you're simply breeding best to best, shouldn't you get fabulous puppies? Because you bred the best male, WUSV champion, to the best female, WUSV champion, and you bred the world champion to the world champion. Shouldn't you get champion puppies? No, you will not. Because breeding works by genetics. It doesn't work by titles earned in competition, which is a matter of training. Because training cannot be genetically passed. It's based on the average of the male and female. So some puppies in that litter will be well above average, like the parents. Some will be duds and only suitable for pet homes, and some will be somewhere in between. So even if you breed the best male to the best female, you will not guess every puppy to be the best. That's because there's no homogeneity of traits and there's no concentration of traits. So, what do you do to preserve a specific champion or a specific line of champions? Well, you do line breeding, which will concentrate traits. Okay. Let's go over the risks first before we talk about technique, okay? So in any line breeding, inbreeding program, you're carrying risk. You're amplifying good and bad traits. You're not just amplifying the good, you're also amplifying the bad. So one of the risks is inbreeding depression. let's say you said the same stud dog, which was the grandfather or the great-grandfather to all the dogs in your gene population. When everybody has the same grandfather, no matter what kennel you choose, he becomes a bottleneck in your breeding program. Whatever diseases he has now is spread throughout hundreds and hundreds of dogs. That's the problem with breeding in a male dog. He spreads his genes across a large gene pool, and if everybody's descended from the same male or one or two males in a certain generation, then that bloodline becomes dominant and you've created a bottleneck. So that's called inbreeding depression. Another possibility is disease. Now, inbreeding and line breeding does not cause disease by itself. But because you're doubling up on recessive traits, you can have a bad gene masked by a good gene, but once it's bred to another partner which also has the bad genes, now you've bred two copies which were masked, they become essentially unmasked. So if you bred a carrier, which normally would not have a problem because the good gene masks the bad gene, and you bred a carrier to another carrier. Now, this is multiplied through line breeding and inbreeding. So when you constantly outcross, a dominant always masks the bad carrier gene and you never see the disease because one copy is insufficient to cause the disease. But when you breed a carrier to a carrier, now you have the disease. So that's where genetic testing which we now have at our disposal, reduces breeding a carrier to a carrier. So if you're not willing to do genetic testing, don't do this. You're going to create disease. So don't do that if you're not willing to spend money on genetic testing. Another prerequisite is hips and elbows. Your founder population must be tested with OFA hip x-rays for good hips and elbows. If you have bad hips and elbows and you breed another dog with bad hips and elbows, you're going to lock that in. So you don't want to lock that in. You want to lock in good hips and elbows. So that's another caution, non-negotiable gate you must pass through. These are gates that you must avoid. What's another risk? Less fertility. As you keep inbreeding and inbreeding, your fertility drops. And you have smaller and smaller litter sizes. And if you don't outcross, you eventually will have no fertility at all. The dogs will lose their ability to reproduce. So there is less fertility unless you line breed, outcross it, and breed back to your line. If you only inbreed and linebreed and inbreed and inbreed, you will reach the point of zero fertility very quickly, even if you don't have disease. So that's another risk. All right, so if you're not willing to spend money on genetic testing, you're not willing to spend money on hips and elbow testing, don't do this. Don't do this, all right? The well-being of the dogs must always be your primary concern, because you cannot sell sick dogs because you refuse to spend money on health testing. So if this is your goal, to sell cheap puppies quickly, don't do this. Alright, so how are we going to explain this video? The video will be divided into three components. The first component would be the male line method, and I'll explain two techniques. The first technique will be a half-sibling technique, and I've covered this in other videos, which is an inbreeding technique. And we're going to cover the bracket approach, brackets formula, which I have another video on that. And if you haven't watched it, go watch it, okay? And I'm not going to repeat that in detail because there's this whole video on it. So the male method will involve these two approaches, I'm going to briefly revisit them to show you the male mechanism approach. After recovering this approach very quickly, I'm going to go quickly through it, we're then going to cover a female approach. And there are two approaches. One is called reciprocal mating. Involving a female and her daughters with constantly different males that you've inbred and then bred, outbred and then bred again, where the daughters and granddaughters of a specific female perpetuate your line. That approach is very hard to accomplish. You need a lot of dogs and a lot of space. And then we're going to create another technique called the parallel technique. And this technique involves a lot more steps compared to the other technique, but this is the technique we're going to cover. We're going to cover the technique called the parallel technique. Now, so we're going to cover this, we're going to avoid this, okay? I don't have time to explain the reciprocal mating technique. If you want to read the reciprocal mating technique, read the book by Jay Lush, okay? Alright, so this is the approach of this video, okay? So we're going to repeat the male methods, and once you see the male methods, we're going to contrast them with the female method, and how to build a line differently off of a female as opposed to a male. So let's dive right into it. Sorry, I'm drinking a lot of water. It's pretty hot in this room. It's cold outside, so I have the heat pumped up all the way. Alright, so everybody got this far, right? So far, so good? Alright, so first we're going to go into the male technique very quickly, and then we're going to go into the female technique. Okay? So the first male technique is not line breeding, it's just outright inbreeding, okay? So the first male technique is an inbreeding technique, not a line breeding technique. Okay? You're going to create a sire who's a superior dog. That's why you're choosing him. You're not just choosing any sire or any male, you're choosing a male of outstanding characteristics. You're going to breed this sire to female 1, we're going to call it female A, female B, and they're not related, and female C. As a consequence of being bred, everything out of these females are half siblings, right, of each other. So you're going to create son of female A will be called son A, daughter A, and this is multiple sons and daughters. I'm only picking 2 for ease of visualization. This will be son B, son of female B will be called son B, daughter B, and will be called son C, daughter C. Okay? And as you imagine, we're going to do son A to daughter B. And I showed this in video 3A of my series. Daughter A to son B. Again, A and B. Daughter A to son C, A plus C. Daughter C with son A or son B, and this will be C plus A. I think you get it. And all of these are half siblings, and this is your F1 generation. In the F2 generation, which is the generation after this generation, you're going to take these half siblings and breed them to each other, or breed back to the original male. That's called back breeding. So back breeding, which is back massing, back breeding involves a grandsire to granddaughter mating, or a great grandsire to granddaughter mating. So we'll be taking these dogs back to their grandfather, because at this point he's a grandfather, not a sire. And that's back breeding. Back massing is accumulating cousins of the same ancestor and breeding them to each other, because that male is dead, you can no longer breed to him. And by breeding multiple copies of that ancestor, you increase his percentage of genes over time. That's back massing versus back breeding. I have a video on that as well. Okay. So this is the typical technique to give credit where credit is due. There's a video I'm going to link in the description by a breeder created the American Sentinel, and I'm going to link a video of this method in the description so you can watch Lee Robinson explain this further. I didn't get the idea from him, I already knew about this idea, but it's a further explanation of this method. So this is how a breed is started, or a line is started. It's a half-sibling outcome to a half-sibling. So half-siblings bred from half-siblings, or half-siblings bred back to the foundation sire. Notice the focus is the sire, not any of the females. Okay. So this is the first technique, an inbreeding technique. The second technique, using a common sire. Again, the focus is the sire. Notice the focus is the male, not the females, right? Is the following technique. I'm going to give the dogs names, because these are actually really dogs, I know. So we're going to take a dog named Jago, okay, and we're going to breed him to a bitch named Kelly. And that's going to produce a daughter. Okay, we don't care about the other pups, we're going to just keep the best daughter, okay? There will be other pups obviously as well, but we're going to focus on one outcome, not all the outcomes that came out of it, right? Now Jago is partnered with a dog named Diamond Huang, Diamond we're going to say, to produce a dog named Ike. Now Ike is the son of Jago, right? We're going to take the son of Jago. Now who is this? This is his daughter, right? With Kelly, right? So we're gonna, let me redraw this better. So we're going to use the same dog twice. I'm going to just draw him twice. So Jago and Diamond. And Jago and, what did I write? Sorry. Jago and Kelly. Jago and Diamond produced Ike. Jago and Kelly produced, I don't know her name, let's say Berta. Now, who are Ike and Berta? They're half siblings, right? I'm not going to partner Berta with Ike, because that would be a half sibling, right? I'm going to breed Berta with another dog named Zeus. To produce a female named Miranda. Now, who is Miranda to Jago? That's his granddaughter, right? His daughter is Berta. An unrelated dog named Zeus was partnered with Berta. Who's Berta with respect to Jago? That's his daughter, but with Kelly, not with Diamond, right? So who is Berta and Ike? They're half siblings, right? So this is what's called a 2-2 line breeding. They're 2 generations back on Jago. Now, who's Miranda? She's 3 generations from him, right? 1, 2, 3, right? So she's his granddaughter, right? you're going to take Ike and breed him with Miranda, and that's a 2-3 on Jago. This is classic brackets formula. You're breeding a son of Jago to his granddaughter. On the father's side, Ike is the son of Jago. On the female side, Jago is the granddaughter of Jago. Your coefficient of relationship is 37.5%. Certainly less than half siblings, which is 50%. So it's less intense than half siblings. So this is a half uncle to niece marriage, right? Okay, so this is a half uncle to niece marriage, because who is Miranda? Well, Bertha is Ike's half sister. So the son of Ike's half sister is Ike's half niece. So this is a half uncle to niece marriage, not a full uncle, a half uncle, okay? Now, what are we emphasizing here? Clearly it's Jago. Now, how many dogs are unrelated versus related? Well, Jago is common. Who's unrelated? Diamond, Kelly, and Zeus. So we got the DNA of 3 dogs which are unrelated to Jago in this situation, right? By contrast, if we had a half-sibling situation, I hope this shows up on camera. I'm wiping it down as best as I can. If we had a half-sibling situation, we have Kelly here, and we have Miranda here. I'm just making up names, guys. And each of them produced a pup. Well, that would be a half sibling. How many unrelated dogs you have? Only these 2, right? 1, 2. So in a half sibling marriage, there's only 2 dogs to give you heterozygosity, not 3. In a half uncle to niece marriage, there's 3 unrelated dogs involved rather than 2. So obviously you have a greater heterozygosity in a half uncle to half niece marriage than in a half sibling marriage, right? So I just wanted to point out the number of not related dogs versus the number of related dogs. All right, so those are the techniques to perpetuate a male, right? That's how we perpetuate a male dog. All right, what have we done in perpetuating a male dog? We have used him and his son to perpetuate him, right? In other words, it's him and his son, Ike, that perpetuated Jago. Do we use any of the females to perpetuate the male? No, only as a mechanism to perpetuate the male. The females became almost irrelevant because we're perpetuating the male, that's who's we're line breeding on. Not that you can choose inferior females, but the coefficient of inbreeding of the female is kept low because she's a vessel through which you're passing the male. In other words, the COI is on the male, not on the female. So you want a female which is phenotypically similar to the male. Let's say he's black, you want a black female or black and tan. You want a similar top line, similar head shape, similar physical ability, similar temperament. So phenotype matters. Because if the females are completely different look than the male, no matter the fact that he's the common male, they will not pass his traits because they're so phenotypically different from him. So they have to be compatible with the male, but they are not the goal. Perpetuating the male is the goal. So it's done through the male and his son in one example, or through a male and multiple of his sons. So a male line is perpetuated through the stud dog and his sons. That's how it's done. All right, so that's the main idea of a male-based line. All right, now we're going to get to the heart of the video, which is how to perpetuate a female-based line. to draw the idea and then I'm going to go into detail, okay? So here's my brood bitch, which is my foundation bitch. And she has 3 daughters. From different sires. And then the outcome of each of the sisters is then crossed with each other. And you say, well, how is that different from the male having the half-sibling technique? It's not the same. These are parallel rails, right? Let me explain how this actually works. So, how this works in practice is the following. We're going to take some of my own dogs by way of example. I have a female named Bailey, whose father is Karl van Brandenburg, whose father is Yukon. So in line breeding Bailey, I'm also line breeding her father and grandfather, right? Because in line breeding on her, you're line breeding on her parents and grandparents, right? All right. Keep this in mind as I draw this example. In my first litter, she was partnered with my boy Jake and produced, we're not going to go through all the ancestors, but produced a dog named Frasier, and a dog named Kaiser. They're full brother and full sister, okay? With a dog named Django, once my boy Jake died, he was a great dog. We used a Schutzen-3 male called Django. We're not going to go through all the kids involved, we're just going to go through one, which is Bella, and her full brother named Thor. Notice we have brother and sister, brother and sister. Full brother, full sister, full brother from sister, but from different fathers, right? You see that? Okay. Now, what is our goal? Our goal is to increase her genetics, right? Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we have a dog named Winston, who was imported from Germany, whose father is Sato van Perot, and whose mother is Athena Gardens Zasha. I'm going to just write Zasha. Zasha is a 3-3 on Yukon, okay, which makes her son 4-4 on Yukon. Okay, so if she's 3 generations back, the next generation is 4 generations back. You follow that? Now let's write out some terminology before we go further. So I'm not going to erase this, but I'll erase this, okay? Just for anybody who hasn't watched the previous videos, 3-3 is a first cousins, common grandfather. 4-4 is second cousins, common great-grandfather. And 5-5 is third cousins, common great-great-great-grandfather. Okay, so that's the terminology, 3-3, 4-4, 5-5. Just in case you didn't know, I'm repeating it from previous videos. Now, we're going to create the following. We're going to breed Frasier to Winston. We're going to breed Bella to Winston. Okay. Is Winston the pillar male of this program? Well, he's used twice across 2 different half-sisters. He would appear to be, right? In a female breeding program, the male is not the focus. The male is in furtherance of the female. So as males are bred to sisters from the same mom, if they don't serve the purpose of perpetuating the qualities of the female, they're discarded from the breeding program. Let me say that one more time. The male is not the focus. Different males are tried at different times from a common grandmother. If bred to her daughters, the male does not produce the female's characteristics, they're discarded from the breeding program and you try again in the next heat. That is the difference with the female-centric line, all right? So although Winston is bred to each half-sister, he's not the focus. This will produce Winston Frasier daughter, right? This will produce a Winston Bella daughter, right? All right. We're going to call this rail A. And we're going to call this rail B. Okay? So far, so good? All right, now. What do we have in rail A and what do we have rail B? Well, Winston is a 4-4 on Yukon himself. And Bella, through Bailey, remember Bailey goes to Carl and then goes to Yukon. So Bella goes to Bailey, right? That's her mom. She has Carl in the third generation, that's her grandfather. Yukon is her great-grandfather. So Bella carries him as a great-grandfather once. Winston, by way of Zasha, carries him twice. So this will produce 4-4, this is Winston, comma, 4. The number on the left is the male, the number on the right is the female. So he's 4-4 twice, because he's the male. That's why it's on the left. And the female is on the right. So this is 4-4 on Yukon. Now, Jake, through a dog named Born von Wallstreet, also goes to Yukon. So Carl and Born are half brothers. So we have an extra loop through Born to Yukon. So Frasier is a 4-4 on Yukon as well. So in rail A, Frasier is a 4-4 and Winston is a 4-4. Now if you remember my earlier videos, a 4-4-4 is double second cousins. It's the equivalent of a 3-3, which is first cousins. In other words, genetically, being great-grandfather twice is as if you're grandfather, not great-grandfather. In other words, we're bringing him one generation closer. So this rail is more line-bred on Yukon than this rail because it repeats the same great-grandfather one more time. Backmassing. We're increasing the influence of this dog even though he lived 20 years ago. Okay? So far so good. We got rail A and rail B, right? Now, let's continue. So we have rail A, and we have rail B. Rail A is Winston / Frasier. Rail B is Winston / Bella. Okay. What does Winston add to the equation? Frasier goes back to Yukon through Carl. So does Bella. Because through their mom, Bailey, that's her father. Winston does not. He's a completely different path with the same great-grandfather, so he widens the pedigree. Because he shares the same great-grandfather, making him a second cousin. So Winston is a second cousin to Frasier, and Winston is a second cousin to Bella. So he's not that close. He's a second cousin, not a first cousin. So he brings in a different chain of homogeneous genes than the Caro chain. The Caro chain creates long blocks of homogeneity through that particular parent. But Winston carries a different block of homogeneity through a different. So first we're widening the pedigree. We're not tightening it, we're widening it. Because these two dogs are not really that related. They're only related as second cousins. That's not very close. They're double second cousins, but that's not close. Because there are 4 generations of other dogs involved. Remember, grandparents are 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. So he's 1 great-grandparent, but there are 7 others here, and there are 7 others here. So are we tight here? No. 7 other great-grandparents, 7 other great-grandparents on the male and the female. 14 complete unrelated great-grandparents and other dogs. In other words, this is not tight at all. We've widened the pedigree here, not tightened it. Now, so we haven't done any kind of line breeding yet at all. This is actually widening the pedigree first, okay? Now, we have 2 choices at our disposal. Remember, Frasier is the daughter of Jake. Who is her brother? Kaiser. Remember, Bella is the daughter of Jago. Who's her brother? Thor. So if we breed Kaiser, the full brother of Frasier, the daughter of the Winston Frasier cross, if bred with Kaiser, this is the daughter, we'll call it daughter 1, D1, just for the sake of example. So if D1 is bred with Kaiser, this becomes what? This becomes the Jake line, doesn't it? Because Jake is the father of both Kaiser and Frasier, right? Because this becomes the Jake line. This is Jake's daughter and this is Jake's son, right? So that will be a full uncle to niece marriage. Full uncle, not half uncle. And this would be daughter D2. Who's Thor? He's full brother to Bella. Who are they kids of? They're kids of Jago. That's their father. So D2, daughter 2, times Thor, that's really the Jago line, isn't it? That's their common father. So we're line breeding on Jago here and line breeding on Jake, but we're also line breeding on Bailey because they're daughters of Bailey. So this will become a 2-3 on Bailey and a 2-3 on Jake. And this will become a 2-3 on Bailey and a 2-3 on Jago. Okay? Now, so each dog is 37.5% of the total genes. Now, is this the female line? No, because the 2 male partners she was bred to produce Thor and Bella or Frasier and Kaiser are also repeated, right? Because it's a full uncle to niece marriage. How do we make it a female line? We reverse it. Instead of taking Frasier, where her brother is Kaiser, we use Thor, which is the brother of Bella, not Frasier. It's the same mother, but a different father. That's what I'm saying. And instead of using Thor here, we use Kaiser here. In other words, instead of doing this dog here and this dog here, we flip it. Now it's a half uncle, not a full uncle. Now this becomes a 2-3 on Bailey only, because we're not repeating Jake. And this becomes a 2-3 on Bailey only, because we're not repeating Jago. So by using the opposite half-brother, not the full brother of Frazier, but the half-brother of Frazier, and not the full brother of Bella, but the half-brother of Bella. Remember, we flipped the two boys. Now we're 2-3 and Bailey, 2-3 and Bailey, without repeating the male that she was bred to in two different litters. And now we take this outcome and we breed it to each other, still maintaining 37.5% Bailey. And Bailey becomes the foundation bitch of the entire line. That's how you breed in a female. It's more steps. So what is this? This is two parallel tracks. Rail A is a track, rail B is a track. Now notice Winston becomes a grandfather in both situations, right? But he's not doubled up. He's only 3 generations back, but he's not being doubled up. The grandmother we're doubling up on is really Bailey from both sides. So the male is in use in furtherance of the female, not as the foundation of the line, but as a furtherance of the female. That is the parallel, parallel tracks, rail A, rail B, combined using the opposite half uncle, not the full uncle, in each rail. That is how you create a female baseline. I hope this was useful. There's other ways of doing it. I hope this was clear. Please subscribe to this channel if you